Okay, well, now that I've gotten all the things about it that annoy me, which you can see in my first review for this book in the description box below, now I'm going to talk about why I think this might actually be one of the best Riffs books that has come out in years. Which, yes, there is kind of a reluctant tone to me saying that because there are things about this book that just kind of piss me off on principle. But goddamn, it's actually a pretty good read. Um, it may have been born from the fact that, as Kevin Symbieta talks about in his preamble, he himself, kind of like started this off as writing one book and it ended up becoming something different. But there's two things in particular I guess I want to focus on that it introduces kind of into the mix of things. One of which is the concept of the psyops division. I feel that's something that really should have been like actively present in the Rifts setting from the get-go. I feel it serves a need that Psy Battalion didn't quite fulfill to really kind of get across this kind of uber fascist hyper controlled dictatorship that the coalition is. PsyOps Battalion and its operations and with its network of snitches and drop points and handlers and the Manhunters themselves. That should have been around all along, and actually has some rather profound implications for some of the existing various kind of conspiracies that exist within the upper echelons of the coalition military and government that have already been present in the Rift settings, like the Republicans from the revised Sourcebook 1, and the Vanguard from the Chi-Town Burbs series of mini-adventure booklets. You kind of have to reconcile and think a bit, like, how have they managed to, like, maintain cohesion and not been outed by a group like PsyOps? And I feel there's a potential there if you want like a good basis for a Rifts game that's actually set in one of the big mega coalition cities and not out there in the wilds of the randomized wastelands, and have kind of more like a cyberpunk espionage kind of thing going on with a lot of psychic activity and magic and other things that do make Rifts. Will bring in the PsyOps division from this book, and then also allow potentially for players to choose from other factions like Republican characters or the Vanguard, and possibly even maybe even mix in some of the black market factions like the Chicago Network or the Immaterial Hand. And I believe you could have the makings for a really interesting spy versus spy kind of campaign if you want to put in the legwork for it. That in many ways actually would be even more ideal for online type of streaming, gaming, your Zoom call type of stuff, as opposed to tabletop, because that way you could potentially better isolate the players so they don't necessarily know what the others are doing every time you address what one player or another is up to. And then though you can also unmute people so that those times when everyone's kind of involved in the discussion and the order of negotiation and all that kind of stuff. I think that could work. Like I said, it needs a little thought. It's just something I kind of came up with earlier while reading it. Like I said, the last video it was like 15 minutes of anger, and I still stand by everything about it, but at the same time, paradoxically, because the whole idea of being able to hold two ideas in your head at once, even if they're contradictory, like I said, it's actually a pretty goddamn solid source book, in spite of its flaws. The PsyOps division really needed to be there the whole time, and it's kind of weird having to retroactively sprinkle it back into the timeline and still allow for the fact that they never discovered all these other institutions that have also been buried within, the coalition's infrastructure for all this time. The other thing, though, and possibly even the more profound, is the suggestion that Lord Coke is actually the secret true bad guy of the setting this whole time. Another thing that also you have to work backwards to kind of justify. And it's something that they don't definitively say is true. It's just really strongly suggested that is a possible interpretation that you could take as to what the final seventh apocalypse hidden danger is supposed to be. Of, someone who is like seen as a champion for everyone and peace and justice, who is actually like really like the spawn of a demon and all that kind of stuff. Which like fundamentally would rather like probably rock a lot of old time fans of Cyber Knights, and their outlook on things. I'm not sure if people, the long term fans are going to take to the idea that Lord Coke is actually low key like the dude. He's the emperor, from Star Wars kind of a thing. Like, there's gonna be some moment where like, he achieves victory and everyone bows to him, and then suddenly, like turns it on everyone. It's just an interpretation, but they certainly linger on that particular interpretation when discussing the subject. And I think it's an interesting twist, but it's part of what I was talking about, how the book is very much framed as, and from the coalition as the good guys kind of perspective. That's always kind of been there in Rifts, but I guess kind of really didn't bloom until the Siege of Tolkien. There's a spin, obviously, that, yes, Rifts, obviously you can make analogies for like, nationalism and people being inclusive to outsiders, the coalition wanting to tightly control psychics and outright banning magic users, that there's echoes of like the, governments, regulating, religious institutions and outright, outlawing certain alternative lifestyles. And the obvious, the DBs who are sometimes here, not even because they wanted to come here, but all being like labeled as invaders, they're coming to like take our land and all that kind of stuff. There's obvious analogies to be taken out of all that, except when you ignore, the real world and analogies that we have as an audience, and like look at it from the inside of the setting and buy into the reality of it. You are dealing with a situation where human beings, are now like barely even half the planet's total sentient population. And a good chunk of those things that have come through to replace them and take over certain quadrants of the planet that have for tens of thousands of years, at the barest minimum, been in human hands, are under extremely hostile and outright evil kind of races from a human point of view. The fact that magic does allow a kind of an entry point for those sorts of entities, does kind of somewhat justify at least at the bare minimum, a certain wariness of magic users. There's always going to be paranoia about psychics from the non-psychics, because no one likes the idea that someone can just like read their mind and you have no defense against it. At least if you yourself are psychic, you could potentially throw up some sort of like mind block kind of effect if you take the right powers. But your average normie on the streets has no defense against that. And especially if you're like a person in a position of power within that kind of a dictatorship structure, and you yourself are not psychic, yeah, you're going to be very, very leery of psychics. While at the same time, though, also needing to use them for your own ends to protect yourself from the other psychics. The problem with the coalition in many ways is that they didn't do like the new German Republic and still kind of like maintain a cosmopolitan attitudes. The Prosecks deliberately like decided to like take on these Nazi-esque motifs and how everything's designed and looks, with like fucking giant flying skull ships and giant spider skull walkers and walking skull robot smashing guys, and everyone's fucking combat armor looks like skulls. In retrospect, I really wish they hadn't done the redesign they did on all the Coalition armor, because, in the mid-90s, the more kind of anime style of the revised Coalition designs that came out of the Coalition War Machine source book, they were cool back then, but looking back on them now, I kind of wish they had just maintained the original aesthetic of how the things looked. But still, to like actively to have these super terrifying, presentation of the soldiers instead of just using camouflage armor and more tactically, reasonable kind of outlook on how you want to design your craft. I mean, the Death's Head transport, I guess, is kind of cool looking in a Zardoz kind of way, but one would imagine like it's terribly unaerodynamic to be having a big flat-faced skull with eye sockets hurling at supersonic speeds through the air. It's got to be terribly inefficient on those poor engines and all that kind of stuff. But yet, within themselves, as far as humans go, outside of the fact that if you have the mutation that allows for psychic abilities, or you've actively chosen to study and practice magic despite the massive taboos around it that have existed for centuries by that point within like whatever remnant human cultures have managed to survive the Dark Ages, like they're accepting. There's like absolutely not a drop of a hint within the coalition that they give a shit about your skin color or your sexuality or your gender. If you can perform, you can perform. If you're useful to the Emperor, you're useful to the Emperor. And for the most part, the people who make it through the burbs and the selection process to get in, or who are born into the system, enjoy some of the most comfortable lives of any of the human beings to be found on the entire planet. To what degree does that justify the kind of like military buildup and stance they've surrounded themselves with in order to be able to achieve that? I guess as an argument for the ethicists out there in the audience. But, there is their rationale to it. But yet at the same time, though, because of like, it's not even just like the directly terrifying military style, or the fact that they're like so casually murderous towards other sentient species, like the deliberate of making everyone ignorant of history, making everyone illiterate, making it, I guess it's that old, security, comfort versus freedoms argument. The more secure and comfortable you want to be in a dangerous world, the more of your personal rights and your ability to have like knowledge of what's really going on. Just basically just like living your entire life with nothing but propaganda. It'd be like if what would we be like if we had no schooling at all. We were never taught to read as children. All we've basically had our entire lives are Marvel movies about how cool the Emperor Prozac and his family is. And that's all you've had your entire life. And that's kind of what it is to be within the coalition. And in the end, I have a hard time, justifying all that in the sake of a little bit of safety. That's still precarious in the end anyway, because unfortunately the world is a dangerous place, and no matter how much you want to surround yourself with mega damage capacity walls, there's always going to be shit that leaks through, and there's always going to be the fact that in the end you can never really even trust yourself, and you never know what sort of madman might be in power one day to replace you, and what sort of tools that you've given them to write what they want. So, upon the pages of future history. Anyway, I guess that's about it. Like I said, it's a subtly good read for, of the, various books they've put out in the last 5 years. And yeah, Psyops Division is good, and the Lord Coke idea is like, it's at least worth playing with in your head, whether or not you actually want to, use that one or not in your own games. Because as I say, it's like they don't really decisively say, yes, this is what it is. But like I said, they just do kind of linger on the suggestion of it a little too long. So it kind of makes me think that maybe that's what old Kev has in his brain, that he's just not going to outright tell us for some reason. Who knows? I guess we'll find out some other year when we finally get some other source book that kind of just comes out of nowhere instead of the ones that have already been listed as like, pre-order now 3 years ago. Anyway, stay waspinated.